G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. So far a fantastic midweek and that you're looking after yourselves. Now today as always we have a lot to go over and look, probably more than usual, but I enjoy being here and chatting to you guys. Even if it affects my numbers, I enjoy it, and I know for the people that enjoy it that it does a lot, because things are incredibly complex. There needs to be nuance added. Things aren't as simple as the headline in the media that people read and go, yep, my whole opinion is formed of this. So today, what are we going to talk about? Okay, we need to look at the maps in length, what is going on. So we'll talk about that. We need to have a look at a couple of strategically important strikes. Remember, I don't just report on if someone gets blown up here. I report on what I see as important, either something new entering the battlefield or something that may have more importance overall beyond just that theatre. Then we need to talk about mobilisation. Ukraine's need for more troops to enter the battlefield, given the way that the war is going at the moment, and the possibilities for this, of course, this will give and determine how the future will look. We'll talk about that at length. We need to talk about, of course, China and Russia's growing relationship. We'll look at pros and cons of this, what solves what. So we'll talk about that at length, and we'll also put that as well with speaking about, of course, the claims that North Korean troops are going to enter the battlefield in Ukraine, although some will say that they already have entered the battlefield, and there's some claims around this. And then we need to talk about Ukraine and Poland. The relationship there, the strained relationship as it is looking at the moment, to do with some historical problems that have occurred from a massacre or from a genocide, depending on who is reporting it. So look, as I said, we've got a lot to go over. So where I'm going to start is we're going to start at the strikes. Now, we have this bit of footage here coming from Mykolaiv. Now, what this footage shows is in an industrial sector of Mykolaiv here. We can't see exactly what is hit, but I've done the geolocation here, so I've done just a pretty rough estimate of where this area is, but I think I'm pretty close. You can see these silos and about where this blue box is here that I've drawn in then red. It's about here, so an industrial sheds here, but what we see is 5 ballistic missiles striking this one single location. Now, said by the Russian pages I've seen to be Iskanders, I think these might be too small for an Iskander, possibly S-300 rockets, or possibly an Iranian rocket also. But definitely what is important here is that 5 ballistics hit that one location. So to spin up the amount of money that it's going to cost to put 5 ballistics on an area, you'd think the intel would have to be pretty solid. But Reuters has reported here through Ukrainian sources that Russia's attack on southern city of Mykolaiv killed 1 person and injured 16. It damaged infrastructure facility, a restaurant, trade pavilions, residential buildings. Ukrainian military said the Russian forces used 7 S-300 and 400 missiles. So not exactly sure what was hit there, but if we see multiple on one area, you would think the intel would have to be pretty good, because that is a bloody expensive area to target. Now, I can't show you the video on here, but I will on the Telegram. We see that a Russian training area here, said to be in Kherson, although I'm not really sure. I can't find an accurate geolocation of this. You can see that there are Russian forces here training, and then this is hit by Ukrainian cluster munitions. There is some speculation as to what specific munition this was, but not for the first time, and likely not the last time we see these Russian training areas seen over, that there is observation by a Ukrainian drone here and then getting struck by clusters. Casualties from this, I have no idea. I said a drone watching this area, observation. That's also true for those strikes in Mykolaiv that I showed you with those 5 ballistics. Now, an important weapon system that is very new and recent on the battlefield are the Russian fiber optic controlled umbilical drones. Remember, a typical drone uses radio control, so it can be jammed. It can't fly in really close terrain, or at least you're going to really lose some of your picture quality. And of course, an umbilical, well, it can't be jammed. The electronic warfare will do nothing. And flying in close terrain like this is something that we are seeing more and more now with this drone here flying through this incredibly built or close terrain wooded area. with no obvious pixelation of the screen. I've spoken before about in urban battles, we may see more and more of these fiber optic drones come into play. It does lose some picture here, but it comes back fairly quickly on the next video. I can show you this on the Telegram. To be in buildings underground, of course, as we have seen, the use of drones inside of buildings has to be very limited due to the radio signal. Something like this in catacombs underneath cities could be incredibly useful. And at the end here, this strikes an M113 Ukrainian armoured personnel carrier. So that is an interesting weapon that we're seeing used more and more on the battlefield. Now, I want to talk to you about mobilization. This is something that you and I have spoken about at length. Now, we're going to jump back and forward between a couple of these slides. Rob Lee, a Twitter, like a largely known Twitter user, commander of the Ukrainian National Guard of this brigade, Colonel Ihor Obolensky, believes mobilization age should be lowered to 21. With this being said here, Tetaragami UA, who I think is one of the most down the line bloggers about this entire war, says people often fail to see the strategic implications. Before the war, 18 to 25 age group numbered just over 1 million. Some have left, others were killed in action. If we mobilize what's left, we are risking losing an entire generation. And if no one remains, then what's the point? And this is what I see as the impossible decision that Ukraine has at the moment, is if they mobilize this, you risk losing the entire generation. But I think if this isn't mobilized, the way that the war is going is not going to shift. It is going to continue with Russia holding the initiative on the battlefield and Ukraine not being willing to mobilize in this, therefore can have problems with Western military aid, because some Western officials will go, if you're not willing to then mobilize, we're not willing to give more aid. And we see the advisor to President Zelensky's chief say this today on Telegram. If this information is service, I can confirm. American politicians from both parties are pressuring President Zelensky on the question of why Ukraine is not mobilizing those aged 18 to 25. The partners' argument is as follows. When there was a US war in Vietnam, they were taken there from the age of 19. That is why the Americans are hinting Western weapons alone are not enough. We need mobilization from the age of 18. President Zelensky did not give up and continues to convince politicians from both parties to give weapons without changing the conscription age. I'm not saying that Ukraine doesn't have a problem with not enough weapons or ammunition or air defense or long-range strikes, but I believe the larger issue is manpower. If you read or listen to problems coming off the front line, and they're speaking about there's just physically not enough men. So, Konstantin, on another Twitter user, he says this: I can't agree with the Kasia commander. This is the one that I showed you first. But I understand him. Ukraine has only 500,000 or so males of age 21 to 25. How many are we going to mobilise? How are we going to survive another 30 years? We won't have any people left and shrink to 5 or 7 million in total population. The economy will not work and the Russians will invade again. This is the problem. This is the triple-edged sword of mobilisation at the moment. If you mobilise that 18 to 25, you are risking the entire generation in the future of Ukraine. If you don't mobilise it, you are risking a loss to the war and potentially further Russian gains. And if you don't mobilise it, I think you're risking a lot of further Western support, because you're not showing your you're not showing your willingness to mobilise that age bracket, like we have seen the advisor to President Zelensky's chief said, where the US was willing in Vietnam. So this whole manpower thing, this is a massive problem. Now, I spoke about Tetaragami UA in this, and I want to speak about him more. So he put this statement on Twitter. Now, a lot of people don't like some of the stuff he says, but I think he is straight shooter, down the line, no BS. I'd love to actually interview him at some point. I'll say what many might think, but are hesitant to voice. Ukraine is currently losing the war, and the trend is negative unless drastic measures are taken. Debates over what constitutes loss or victory can be had. And yes, Ukraine's survival so far has been a big win. I've said this, Ukraine's survival in itself is such a massive victory. One of the issues is, though, that the officials, whether Ukrainian or Western, NATO, whatever, have all put out that victory is nothing short of 1991 borders, which could have a information messaging problem in the future. But even if Russia halts advances and goes on the defensive, we lack the resources to reclaim territories to 2022 borders, let alone the 1991 borders. This is due to many factors: delayed mobilisation, insufficient aid, weak sanctions enforcement, a lack of political will in the West, poor military decisions, delayed aid due to de-escalation concerns, and the sheer reality of fighting a country with 4 times our population, with superior numbers in almost all domains and one of the largest military industries, supported by regimes like North Korea, which contribute more than some European countries with far larger GDPs. Remember, North Korea delivered more artillery shells than the entirety of the EU throughout 2024. Now, I can't speak to the quality of these, but when we're speaking that quantity has a quality of its own, it is embarrassing that North Korea was able to do that and that we were not, that we were buying off third parties or buying products back. But eventually the industry will kick up to refill those stores of shells and hopefully make enough that if there is an attritional protracted war in the future, we don't run out of shells week 1. Manpower shortages are another issue, but that's a separate discussion. Ukrainian leadership bears a good part of the responsibility for these problems. One of the things which I think is annoying a hell of a lot of people, from officials to civilians to everything in between, is that it seems that all the responsibility is bared by the European countries or America or Australia not delivering enough military aid. Is this an issue? Is this a real issue? Yes, it is. But there still needs to be some sharing of responsibility for command with poor military decisions, like he says, as well as delayed mobilisation. That now, even a mobilisation right now would still probably not be in time, or it's almost definitely not in time, for a 2025 offensive. Still, if the West can't supply the 14 brigades Zelensky requested, why discuss drafting hundreds of thousands more? We need to completely rearm way more existing brigades. Who is going to pay for them? Let's be honest. There's little enthusiasm in the US or Europe to fund this. This is the problem. Give us more aid on one side, recruit more people on the other. No one's willing to really look like they're going to budge on this. Let's continue. If Russia retains its occupied territories, it will undermine one of Europe's core security principles. The borders cannot be redrawn by an invading force. In 2014, Russia violated this order, leading to the 2022 invasion. This time, it's not just Ukraine that will have failed, it's Ukraine, the US, and Western Europe's failure to defeat Russia. Some might cite Finland's winter war as an example of what Ukraine should have done. But that war lasted 3 months and ended with Finland ceding territory, paying reparations in the form of machinery and renting a port to the Soviets. Ukraine's demographics today are also very different. The 18 to 25 age group is amongst the smallest, a reality across modern Europe. And this is going to be a problem for every Western country going in the future, is demographics, replacement rate as a whole. Ukraine's demographics are really dire at the moment. One of the problems around mobilisation to try and protect those people going to have children, to fix the demographics in the future, but at the same time, that is your key fighting age. The average age of an Australian soldier, I believe, is like 19. This is where this whole problem becomes. Unless Ukraine and the West create a serious plan to radically increase aid to support mobilisation, where Ukraine commits to mobilising more people on the condition that they are properly armed and trained, and the West provides robust air defence to intercept missiles as decisively as the US does for Israel, Ukraine will lose the war of attrition. Now, this is what I did a video on the other day, and I said, there needs to be like a serious sit down, Zelensky, Biden, Scholz, Macron, whoever, and go, look, are you willing to arm these and train them correctly or not? The other side going, are you willing to mobilise or not? And if the answer is no, if the answer is maybe, if the answer is conditional, then there needs to be then a negotiated process. Because if the answers to this is not a clear yes and going for a victory, balls to wall, all this is doing is extending a savage war of attrition, extending suffering to likely get put into a worse position for negotiation in the future. This will force an unfavourable peace and mass migration from Ukraine to other countries, setting a dangerous precedent. and making it look like the West lost to Russia in the eyes of the world, especially among the enemies of the West. So not only what problems here with then migration or Ukraine's future, but how does this then look to countries that are enemies of the West? How does this look to Iran, into China, to North Korea? If this was, quote unquote, allowed to happen, would China be looking at a neighbouring country? Alex here says something I think is very interesting. Ukraine has lost 45% of its population and whatever percentage of its private sector GDP. Victory isn't about restoring borders. It's about making Ukraine's long-term independence credible enough to bring most of the people back. Again, what I say is, I agree that Ukraine should have all of its borders, but if there's not enough men, not enough weapons to do this, Ukraine at the end of the day is the Ukrainians. It is not the exact just having that border. Could you jeopardize everything if that goal is unobtainable? Is it obtainable or is it unobtainable? Unobtainable? Oh my God, I can't speak. Unobtainable? That is going to be due to what is the willingness for aid, men, recruitment, mobilisation, and even then, I think they need to run some serious calculations to see if that is possible as well. So that, I think, is the biggest story at the moment that is being completely ignored by so many, is the sheer problem of bloody manpower and how that is affecting aid weapons deliveries and how this is all hinging on itself. Again, like my guy on the front line said, it all stems from defensive works. The defensive fortifications, these are exactly the butterfly effect that cause these issues. If there are fortifications that people are willing to defend, they're good enough that they're willing to defend them. You reduce casualties, therefore you reduce the amount of replacements you need. Better fortifications, you use less ammunition, you're less likely to lose those positions, and all of this you can see then affects how many men you need, how much ammo you need. These large issues are all affected from what he says is that very small issue that if you just had more stringent policies on defensive works actually being overseen, that they are correctly built and were correctly built back in whenever they were meant to be built, and to making sure the commanders on the ground know what they're actually stepping into if they're going to a position. So I mentioned this, and I talk then about China. So let's talk about China. China and Russia, they, again, today, pledge to strengthen military ties as Russian Defense Minister visits China. The Defense Minister, Borisov, talks with his Chinese counterpart. During his visit to China, Borisov was set to hold a number of negotiations with the country's military and military political leadership. Now, when meeting with Borisov, Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun called for the sides to deepen strategic collaboration and continuously advance military relations. Under the strong leadership of President Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin, China-Russia relations have reached an all-time high, serving as a model for major power relations. Borisov, in his turn, said that friendly relations between the two leaders played a key role in strengthening strategic ties. Military cooperation between China and Russia, he said, played an important role in maintaining global and regional security. Russia and China declared a no-limits partnership before Moscow invaded Ukraine. President Putin said in August that Russia's economic and trade links with China were yielding results, and the two were working on joint economic and humanitarian projects. But again, in this, what we see is these are at apparently an all-time high, coming from China, not coming from Russia. Last month, Russian and Chinese warships carried out joint drills in the Sea of Japan. Now, one thing that is really worth noting here is China has no formal military alliances. It doesn't have something like NATO. BRICS is not a military alliance, it's an economic alliance. China has no military alliances, although this relationship, this growing relationship with Russia, is a concern in international relations, military circles internationally. And I do agree, in my opinion, that the US, whenever this war ends, however we don't know, will want to rebuild connections with Russia to stop their relationship building with China. China's propulsion into the sphere of being the second largest military power on earth and the speed at which they are increasing will eventually eclipse America if they can maintain that. This is a large problem. Russia and China solve a lot of issues for each other. Yes, they do have overlapping interest in some areas, say in Central Asia and around energy and whatever, but let's look at this as if these two were to have some sort of formal military alliance, which, like I said, is not there yet. So what Russia solves for China? Combat experience. China has no formal combat experience. Ports. Like I've said before, that China can be naval blockaded on the east of China. What Russia can give is, well, Russia's biggest land mass on Earth. If they can open up ports, this alleviates any real naval blockade of China. Of course, China has said that they're a near Arctic power, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I could be wrong. But Russia have a hell of a lot of influence up in the Arctic. New radar stations, new icebreakers, all of this. China's also building new icebreakers. Nuclear propulsion. One of the areas where Russia is ahead of China is in nuclear propulsion, from subs to icebreakers to warships. China is looking for some of that tech, at least from open source. They're also looking for some of the submarine warfare experience and technology, as well as ASW, so anti-submarine warfare. One of the biggest problems in extended war would be China's ability to feed itself grain. Who's the largest exporter of grain on Earth? Russia. As well as China's borders, well, it has no access into, say, Europe. Russia has that through, of course, Ukraine, Belarus, and in. As well as China, by the end of the decade, is trying to get to 1,000 deliverable nuclear warheads. They're not there yet, and they could be after some of the technology or experience in deliverable systems for those warheads. But of course, Russia has a lot of problems. What does China then solve back for Russia? Why would there maybe be a growing relationship here? Well, China has an insanely massive GDP. Russia's is dwarfed by it, so it can solve some of those problems. China's industry is massive. The shipbuilding of China for the PLAAN for the Navy is more than every other country in the world combined, including the merchant Navy. So that solves that for Russia. Of course, high-end systems like microchips as well. Just look at Huawei. Drones, huge. Just the amount, every fucking drone, realistically, every drone's parts comes from China. From DJI to the FPVs, realistically, to get them at a reasonable price needs to come from China. Look at a Black Hornet. That's tens of thousands of dollars compared to a $500 FPV. So solves that there. AI. We don't know how far ahead the US is than China in AI and artificial intelligence, but we're not 100% sure. And of course, fighting age males after Russia has demographic issues and has taken a lot of losses in this war. I put an asterisk there because China, we don't really know the numbers. We believe China has been lying about a lot of their population, but we still know it's an incredibly large population. One of the problems people say run into with China for a large amount of time, China had the one-child policy, was in a protracted war, if there is mobilization, if parents have only had one child, they may be even less willing than normal parents, less willing to actually have their child be mobilized, conscripted to go and fight, if that is then their only child. So you can see why, when I lay this out, why that relationship is building and why Russia, of course, want access to that industry technology, but how in a protracted war, China would want certain elements of Russia. And many have said, and I am somewhat on this side, that China is somewhat using Russia to wear down its main competitor, the US, in things like air defense or artillery. Here we go. So Andriy Yermak, of course, the head of the office of President Zelensky, has said this: the axis of evil is fully forming into a military alliance that challenges democracies and the world order. Now, this is known in circles that I have friends in, commonly referred to actually as the axis of upheaval. This is Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Of course, then you have challenge to world order. Let's not talk military, let's talk challenge to world order. BRICS, huge challenge to that world order. Of course, with what Putin will keep going on about is the multipolar world, so leading that you've got more than one, more than two, so three sort of poles of the world that are all somewhat equal to each other in economic and military. But the rise of the global south, just look at population maps. It'll tell you holy shit, we've got a problem over here. But one of the big things in this is Israel's response, I think, has pushed many people away from the West, away from America. And Russia and China, of course, have used this to push to benefit themselves as well. You can see where money flows down through Iran too. So that is all strategically having a huge effect in this. But absolutely, these alliances, if there was an alliance between China and Russia, right here and now, people say, oh, it might not beat America. America would still win. Okay, maybe. But how does the end of that war look? There would be no winner in that. The amount of casualties would just be absolutely astronomical that no one would walk out of that. But it does absolutely have a challenge to world order in the future, at least to the Western world order as we know it. And this is one of the main critiques, if you read anything from these countries, is they're saying, yes, but the world order is put forward as the Western world order. That is only a small percentage of the actual humans that live on Earth. And this is where you'll see some speakers there talk about its imperialism through the pushing of Western ideals. Very interesting. I can go into that more, but we do know that there are more relationships being built there. Will we see a formal military alliance? I think if that were to happen, the US would be knocking on Putin's door going, what can we do to stop that? Because China's power is doing one of those ones as far as balance around the world. And they sort of solve problems for each other, although have overlapping interest. So let's have a look at the maps and go over a couple of things. So of course, here we have the deep state map. We have Ukraine in the center, of course, the capital of Kiev. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, the red check areas made by Russia over the past 24 hours, the green and blue within Ukraine's borders, area where Russia has been at some point, and the blue into back into Russia, of course, is where Ukraine has had that offensive actions from Sumy into Kursk. So look, let's actually start up there. Now, this map today, Deep State, shows no changes on here, but we jump onto then the Noel reports and we can see around Korennovo to the east that Russia has made back some amount of ground here. This map doesn't show this, but if we just line up sort of where this tree line is down in here, we can sort of see where this is here, this sort of, I don't know, hoof shape, horseshoe shape down in here, that this has been then sort of moved down into that location. But furthermore, we actually have from NOAA reports saying that Ukraine had an offensive as well back into Belgorod, just to the west of then where this Lipsy offensive is as well. So movement back into Russia on now another axis. What will come of this? What will we see? Well, the future will tell us. He gives some footage of these movements as well in these slides that I've got. I'll post those up on Telegram if you want to have a read through. But no more changes on this map here. But there is one important thing. So this is Kupiansk. Of course, we've seen Russia make a little bit of ground recently in the direction of Kupiansk. Another thing we have seen is the increase in glide bombs FABs used then against Kupiansk recently. Now, this lady here says then this. While all eyes are on Donetsk front, Kharkiv just called for a full evacuation of Kupiansk and nearby towns. The military situation is getting worse daily, and the heating can't be provided because of constant Russian attacks. So there has been an evacuation here in Kupiansk that we haven't seen yet. So that would tell us that it is likely that we'll see further Russian attacks either by FABs or maybe assaults in and around these areas in the future. So an area just to keep your eye on. Now we will continue scrolling down. What we can see is just a small advancement out in Toretsk further today by this red check here. I don't have a Syriac map to show this. Further out from Ukrainsk as well on the flank of Seladove. This is an area we really need to keep an eye on because of the flanks and how this can be a very vulnerable point of Seladove. Now, as well, into Otrivsky, out from Hostre, we see this advancement up to the Vovcha River, of course, cutting off this, making this salient in here, then more strategically important, and the way out being more difficult. We believe this was up to here for about a week from Syriac's maps, but that map showing it today, so we can tick, 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 confirm that that has then taken place. Now, we've seen yesterday, I believe, I turned this off. Sorry, turn this on. No, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing now. Sorry, I stuffed up the map. Okay, so we have Vugleda, we have Zolote Neva here, And then we see Syriac maps today. He is showing that there is a Russian advancement out to the east further of Zolote Neva above Novodonetsky. But one thing we do see in this is we did see, I tried to show in the map, but I don't know what I've done. There was movement in here shown by both maps over the past couple of days, so we can confirm there was definitely some movement here. Now we see this advancement here to about, let's just measure 2 kilometers. Remember, any advancement in heavily built up defensive areas like this is important. Out from Prutny, of course, in the sort of Huliopol area, there is Levadny, this little area that sits in here. We can see today a Russian advancement shown by the Ukrainian deep state map. Now, furthermore, we have Syriac's map in here. Now, this is difficult to see, but is showing a further push out to the north from then Levadny as well. Russian army continued advancing north of Levadny and began advancing north of Prutny, reaching the ponds area. So this red dot, I believe, is Levadny, where we're looking. This red dot is Prutny. So pushing further up, see where these then ponds area, I believe, is calling this here, then pushing out in this direction. See this paddock, this like funny shaped right here. So pushing out along this area in here, making some substantial ground by, of course, the Syriac map. We know there was some change in here, so we can confirm this change. We just don't know bloody how much. So Poland was one of the first country, if not the first, to really come to Ukraine's aid and, of course, come very hard and strong. A lot of weapons, a lot of tanks, even aircraft when they weren't meant to, but it was, oh no, we're giving a fuselage for parts and this and that. They'd be a huge supporter of Ukraine. Poland, of course, has a very rough history with Soviets and Ukrainian nationalists too, and this can form some problems. And we're going to look over this today. So this is from, I'm not even going to bother trying to read this, but the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of National Defence, Poland. Now, in this interview, can we talk about the turnaround of Polish-Ukrainian relations? The Volhynia issue is one thing, but there's also the subject of the Ukrainian Legion in Poland and Minister of Sikorski's idea to deprive men who do not report to it and live in Poland of social benefits. Now, we're going to speak about the Volhynia massacres. Now, of course, it is seen to by many as a genocide. Ukraine dispute that this was a genocide or it was more of a massacre, they say. I guess that's here nor there. But what we do know is it was committed by Ukrainian nationalists and that this potentially will be a massive sticking point for relations between Poland and Ukraine moving into the future, of course, with Ukraine looking to enter things like the EU. And we're going to talk about what this gentleman here says specifically about this. And of course, we'll look at then Ukrainians in Poland. But just by chance, then we can see denazification day that it actually was Stefan Bandera was assassinated by a KGB agent and 2 Ukrainian communists today, using then a cyanide gas capsule by shooting it into his face. But the Deputy Minister said a fact is that our society is very shocked by the sight of young men from Ukraine driving the best cars, spending weekends in 5-star hotels. Now, people will say, oh, this is bullshit. People who say that, who haven't seen the nicest cars you see in Poland, have Ukrainian number plates. People that say that isn't true have never been to Poland, because that is 100% true. But that said, the rich never fight in war unless they want to, regardless of the country. From Vladivostok to Melbourne, the rich will not fight in wars. I don't care. And this is unfair to Poles, who contribute to healthcare benefits, education, not to mention weapon supplies and other assistance. We've prepared our units to train Ukrainian troops. We've already trained 25,000 soldiers, but we also want to train volunteers who live in Poland. Well, how many signed up? There was no mass reporting. There was no interest that we had hoped for. I understand the campaign is just starting and will ultimately bring better results. So far, about 300 people have reported, but the calculations were the Legion could have 5,000 or 6,000. Remember, we thought that 5,000 or 6,000 guys were already being trained soon to enter the battlefield, and then History Legends did some digging and he posted that video. It's like, no, it hasn't even started yet. And what he's saying is that 300 people have signed up, let alone the 5,000 to 6,000 that were being hoped. And like we have said, this makes sense. If the war's been going on for over 2.5 years, you're illegally living in Poland, why then are you going to sign up now and go back and fight? Anyway, let's continue on this as it gets into some of these more issues. And this is important because, of course, where Ukraine's goals lie, things like the EU, this is important. If someone says that they will block Ukraine's access to the European Union, they are in line with Vladimir Putin's policy. It's what, Poland's president has said. Harsh words and a sharp discord between the government and the presidential palace. I believe that raising this particular issue is so important for Poles. In this context, Ukraine's accession to the European Union is the most honest approach that can be presented. Because we do not pose this issue as a condition for humanitarian or military support. We have helped and continue to help unconditionally where people's lives are at stake and where we believe that we can contribute to Russia losing the war. Joining the Union is not a case of to be or not to be for Ukraine. It is an opportunity for development, higher GDP growth. This is their chance. We can condition development. And alongside conditions set by the Union, we can put our own ethical and historical condition concerning Volhynia. Of course, that genocide that occurred. So what it's looking like is, regardless of what the president said, that the government may go, yes, but one of the conditions for joining the Union is you need to see to the conditions set of what then occurred by nationalists back in the 40s. How does the Ukrainian side react to this condition in less official talks? The clear and strong positioning of this matter by the entire government, including the Prime Minister's enormous involvement, means that the Ukrainian side is giving signals that it will start exhumations in 2025. So, of course, pulling out bones, bodies. However, until I bow my head before the graves of those murdered in Volhynia, I will be careful. However, there is one important thing that I want to say clearly. The issue of exhumations is not a matter of Polish families towards Ukraine. It is a matter of actions of the Ukrainian state toward the Polish state. So not family to family, it's state to state. The Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance's statement states that in the event of receiving the necessary explanations from Polish citizens regarding the location of potential search sites, we will try and help them. And what he has said is, when I hear that families can get permission for exhumations, it absolutely does not meet our expectations. This is supposed to be a state-to-state relationship with the involvement of state institutions on both sides. Exhumations are carried out on a bilateral basis between countries. We will not agree to a situation which families will demand the exhumation of their loved ones because some of the families are there and some are gone, because everyone has been murdered. Commemoration, however, is due to everyone. So again, state by state, that the family shouldn't have to request this. No, it should be the Ukrainian state to the Polish state. And if this isn't done, this could potentially be a condition of Ukraine entering the EU. Remember, Poland is a very, very powerful country within the EU, especially militarily, and in the future could potentially be militarily the most powerful country in the EU, potentially. With the previous governments too submissive towards Ukraine. The previous government never took the Volhynia issue so seriously. Let us remember that Poland, also due to the actions of the previous government, helped Ukraine militarily. We gave the Ukrainian military equipment worth over 15 billion zloty, and we were the first to give it when others were wondering whether they could send anything. Poland was a massive supporter. If we as Poland had not given them all those tanks, planes and other weapons, there would be no one to help today. And I have the feeling that the Ukrainian side does not remember this, is not aware that if it were not for this Polish help, they would not have reached the stage they are at today. This is not right. Someone will say there is never and will never be a good moment to claim your rights. I am surprised that for over 2 years, no good gesture has been made on the Ukrainian side. I believe that this war could bring a breakthrough in Polish-Ukrainian relations, but without resolving the Volhynia issue, all this will be impermanent. So, again, this is going to be very interesting to see what happens in the future. We know there is still huge support for people like Bandera inside of Ukraine. I can't see why Ukraine wouldn't swallow whatever, and just go, yep, look, we're going to declare this a genocide. We're going to help on exhumations. Given what is at risk with the Polish support, I know that people may go, oh, but it's military and this and that. It's not important at the moment. Well, it's obviously important to Poland. Poland has a massive military, a massive growing military. Of course, is in NATO and the EU with veto powers too. Can't see why there wouldn't just be to make them happy at the least, or do the right thing. Or do the right thing at the least, or just make them happy as well. Legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.